care what you call it or label it. A weapon is a weapon. Yet, you vote for more funding to the same country that is committing the genocide. You cannot sign letters expressing concerns over the forced starvation while enabling the same Israeli government to commit the war crimes using access to food as a weapon of war. You can't boycott Netanyahu's speech. Yet you meet with him later and even spread the racist rhetoric and lies of the government that continues to be rooted in anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia. If I'm not clear, let me make it more clear for Congress. Weapons are weapons. Genocide is genocide, no matter how much people avoid the word. I mean, listen carefully. The elected leaders of Israel are using the language of genocide and ethnic cleansing. Listen to them. It's past time that my colleagues stop making excuses, trying to strategize, and think that somehow there's a strategy around genocide.
Yes, folks, Rashida Tlaib there. I had missed that last line. My colleagues need to stop acting as if there's a strategy around genocide.
No, she was on fire. She really was. It was an incredible speech.
Yeah,
And,
that was
as
taken
everybody
by our
knows-
boy David.
Yeah, it was at the National DSA 2025 convention, which we'll be talking about a lot today. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say just complete shout out and solidarity to Rashida Tlaib. I mean, this has been somebody who has been a hammer of the working class and also a key member of this movement. Somebody who doesn't mince her words, and I think it was very powerful for her to open up the convention speaking in that way. Because it really set the tone, I think, for a lot of things that happened at the DSA convention that we'll be getting into in this program and also programs over the next few weeks, because Matt and I were busy as hell this weekend in Chicago at the DSA convention. We have many, many interviews with incredible comrades all across the country. We even got a conversation with the folks from the Texas Democratic Party who fled the state. You can go and watch that interview right now on our YouTube channel. It was nonstop. We were really excited to be there. It was really wonderful being with everybody, and it was great seeing Rashida. And yeah, we have a lot to get into today.
Yeah, if my computer will allow that. But
Yeah, I
yes,
hope so.
we did do some great journalism. Great job, David, with interviewing Texas state reps.
Gene Wu and Rodriguez Ramos on location, in Chicago, which is really important.
Getting this story about this gerrymander, and and it was also interesting to hear, especially they're both talking great about the type of emphases that their colleagues need to start doing. But I did like Gene saying we need to not be here to say I told you so about things, which is speaking our language here.
Yeah. Well, we're going to bring on our guest, Olivia, in just one second, but we've got a jam-packed show for everybody. We'll obviously be talking a lot more about the DSA convention. We're also going to be talking with Neal Meyer. We had an on-location conversation with him about the DSA convention as well as DSA at large. And we also are thrilled to be releasing our conversation with our friend Seth Harp, who I think has written one of the best books of the year, The Fort Bragg Cartel, where he gets into the ways that the American empire and American imperialism have really come home to roost. And we get into the cartel is the word that we're using for it, around Fort Bragg, the kind of lack of oversight that we have over our special forces in this country, and much, much more. It was really great having Seth on the program.
Yeah, the makers of that Reacher show should stop messing around and just base the next season of that show on this book, from like the local drug stuff in North Carolina, the warehouse parties, to the global narco trafficking ring that goes up close to the Joint Special Operations Command. Amazing book, really.
Yeah, so you'll get all of that up here on our main show, but immediately after that, Matt and I go to the post game, patreon.com/left reckoning, where we got a hell of a lot more. Plus, we'll be taking your questions, sharing our thoughts about the convention, and much, much more. So you can support the show. And look, Matt and I, we traveled over the weekend. It'd be really helpful to get people who've been supporting the show, watching the show for a long time, coming out and supporting us by signing up at patreon.com/left reckoning. But enough plugs. Matt, you want to get this started with our guest here?
Yes, let's bring her in now. Someone who we actually met at the DSA conference, Olivia Katbi. Olivia is organizer with the BDS movement, co-chair of Portland DSA. Olivia, welcome to Left Reckoning.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to see you once again after seeing you this weekend. Just before we get to some of the other topical reasons we're having you on, what's your reactions to the DSA convention?
Yeah, so this was actually my 4th DSA convention. I am an elder in DSA terms, joined right after Bernie ran for president the first time. And every time I go, I am just so reinvigorated and just so much more convinced that DSA is the future in this country. I went to a meetup for people who are interested in working on the Labor for Arms Embargo campaign, which is a resolution that passed during the convention, and it's a campaign to organize within unions for an arms embargo. And I talked to so many people from all over the country who are working on so many different kinds of BDS campaigns. And it just really reinforced my belief that the way to win enough popular support to force an arms embargo in this country is to organize with the Democratic Socialists of America. And, I work in the Palestine movement, so it's something I've been thinking about for a while, the way that we kind of organize in issue-based silos. And socialism really unites all of these causes under the same banner. And, I'm sure you saw all the different kinds of resolutions that were being debated during the weekend, because DSA does all of this kind of work. We're deeply embedded into every part of our communities, in the workplace, in schools, in faith organizations, in different kinds of movements for justice. And we have elected officials all across the country. We're sort of creating a structure that is a party-like organization, if not an official political party. But even more than that, we're training tens of thousands of organizers who, have this shared belief that our society should not be run for the wealthy few, but for the many. And, I think Palestine was very much central to the convention this weekend. And that's great. And that's important. We know that the majority of the country across party lines supports an arms embargo on Israel. So I think, coming out of the convention, it just made it really clear that our task now as DSA is to make what is happening in the halls of power line up with what the people actually want.
100%. I want to note one thing and just share for people who are less familiar with DSA or have never been to a convention before. One of the things that I think is really important about this organization is, one, yes, it's a national organization. That's why we have this big national convention. But, I was able to talk to people from all across the country. And that's a huge advantage, not just in the sense of having an organization, that has representation everywhere, but it's okay, if we want to target this particular industry or this particular company, we can say, okay, where are they headquartered? Where do they get their materials? All this kind of stuff. Being able to have not just a national perspective, to have a national force, but also being embedded all across the local communities allows a national organization to actually be able to act.
Absolutely. And, I was joined by one of my colleagues from the BDS movement who is European originally, and she works with political parties all over the world. And she said that DSA reminds her of the PT before Lula was elected the first time. And that she was so impressed that every single person she talked to was working on some sort of campaign in their community. She was I hadn't ever seen anything like that with other political parties, where, not only are we acting as a party, but we are working on all these grassroots campaigns in every single community across the country. And so that made me feel really good.
You know, Dave Weigel, a semaphore journalist, and I don't have any ill will towards Netroots Nation. It sounds like a great thing to go to. I'd love to go to in the future. But he had a piece about how it was kind of a little bit dead this year. And I just think the way the energy is, it's because the DSA is able to have initiatives like that, like where we're trying to align labor with what's going on in Palestine. That's where the energy exactly is. I mean, I don't want to quote a lot of the DSA folks with the DSA difference, but that seems like that's why people are, really focused on what DSA is doing right now.
Absolutely.
I know we have a bunch to get to. I just want to add one last thing, Olivia. We don't have to go super deep into it, but I think one thing too that was really cool that I think a lot of people wouldn't know if they weren't there was, some of the international folks that we saw there, and that was a very interesting thing. I mean, could you just kind of talk about that a little bit for folks who might not have caught that?
Yeah, actually, one of my comrades who was on the NPC, the National Political Leadership this past term, Laura, she organized that whole international delegation where we had representatives of political parties and different grassroots movements around the world joining the DSA convention. We had a video from Jeremy Corbyn to close us out, and every single international guest just talked about the importance of what DSA is doing. I spoke on a panel about Palestine solidarity. And to open that panel, there were representatives from the Cuban embassy who talked about, they were like, we watch the TV, every time we see something that DSA is doing, like, it's interesting to us and we're rooting for you. Like, all of these left parties around the world are watching what we're building and cheering us on, which is very cool.
Now, unless you wanted to say more on the BDS initiatives, which we kind of covered, there was another panel that you spoke on that, it brought some of the haters because, again, DSA is where all the energy is at. There's this headline here in the New York Post: Zohran Mamdani, of course they're trying it to Zohran Mamdani's Democratic Socialists of America comrades push abolition of traditional family. And in fact, you were quoted, and I think we would say misquoted, by the New York Post doing unethical things in journalism.
Shocking.
The standards have stayed exactly the same as as long as I've been known of that paper. But Olivia, what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the New York Post is really just, grasping for anything they can to try to attack Zohran. And, they ran this article. By the way, they pulled this information from a tweet that was an AI summary of this panel I did.
Wait a second. Are you serious?
Oh my God.
Yes. And yeah, so I was on this panel at Socialism Conference, which was hosted by Haymarket Books, talking about how the left should relate to family. And that was my idea to do this panel because, it's something we're really focusing on in Portland. We have a new campaign called the Family Agenda for Portland, which maybe I can talk a little bit more about. And one of our biggest wins as Portland DSA was passing a ballot measure in 2020 that won free preschool for all 3 and 4-year-olds in the county, paid for by taxing the rich. And I'm a new mom, so it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. And I was going into it really wanting to talk about those wins while also understanding that the way the right talks about family is much different than the left. The right wing sees family as this coercive institution where men dominate and have complete control over their wives and children who are essentially their property. I mean, just as we were having this conversation over the weekend, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, posted a video saying that women shouldn't be allowed to vote. So this is what the right wing thinks the role of the family is, while the left is talking about, breaking out of that traditional oppressive construct and supporting families in all their forms. That includes multi-generational families, same-sex couples, providing programs that better support children and mothers, like universal childcare, paid parental leave, protecting reproductive health, and then also creating structures and programs that provide support for everyone so that, for example, women are not forced into marriages or staying in abusive marriages because they have to. And so, yeah, what the New York Post quoted me as saying, I was not even saying that myself. I was framing another panelist's argument, not saying that that's what I was arguing. So it's really frustrating to me because I think that DSA needs to lead with messaging that shows that we are the party that is actually supporting families in all their forms, not the right wing who are using the concept of family as a sort of like cudgel to oppress women, and who are in actuality ripping children away from their parents every day with ICE. I just saw a story yesterday about a woman in Washington State, just north of me, who is in ICE detention with her 6-year-old son. She's from New Zealand, and she was married to a U.S. citizen, and she was on the track to become a citizen, but her husband was abusive, and she divorced him, and that like totally messed up her immigration status. And this is the kind of thing the right wing wants. And this is the kind of thing that the left means when we talk about moving beyond the oppressive structure of the nuclear family. Forcing women to stay in abusive marriages because it's their only option is something that is reinforced by our laws and systems in the US. And, call me trad, but I think two people should get married because they love each other and that's how they want to live their lives, not because, the way our society is set up has forced them into it. So that's kind of the thing that we were talking about on this panel. And it was completely sane and not deranged, as some journalists have said on Twitter. So yeah, I am actually just glad that it's getting a little more attention so we can talk about this more.
Olivia, I hate to do this if you're not familiar with these figures, but you're on YouTube. Do you know who Steven Crowder is? He's a very popular right-wing commentator.
I've heard the name.
Ugly character. We've covered this a lot because he has been one of these people who has had, let's say, marital issues in the past. And there's a really horrific video of him basically trying to keep his wife on the property, not allowing her to leave. And since then, he has been one of these people who has been talking a lot about how, we shouldn't allow people to get divorced in this country, right? So when you're talking about this isn't just like, some like Reddit commentators or things like that are saying that these are folks who are watched by a lot of Republican staffers, have influence in the party, and it's like, it is sickening to see the way that the Republicans in some people's minds is seen as like the pro-family party, or the right is seen as like the pro-family organization, when in reality that's what they're doing. It is truly disgusting. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the initiatives that y'all have been pushing in Portland, because I think that this is actually a very critical fight, because I do think that there has been a kind of like information victory, let's say, for the right, as in general for the American public. When they think of family, they think of the right. I'm not saying that's right, but they have been able to sort of own that lane a little bit.
Yeah, and that's exactly why this came up, because we were thinking about how to defeat the right wing in this country. Like after Trump got elected again, we were like, how can we sort of recalibrate? And, we were also thinking about articulating a vision of what we're fighting for, because, under Trump, we're having to fight against so much, against fascism, against deportations, against genocide. And we wanted to like articulate a positive vision. And like you said, one thing the right wing does is they try to have this monopoly on being the party of family. And, the left, we haven't been so great at that, particularly because we support programs that are universal, meaning they help everyone. We're not necessarily making our messaging explicitly about families. And so that's something we really wanted to try to do with this campaign. And we were actually really inspired by Zohran Mamdani's campaign, because when he first announced he was running, he said he was going to do a family agenda for New York City and talked about these baby boxes that he was going to send to all new parents. We were also thinking about how to do this, especially as it relates to our city politics, where we now have 4 DSA members on city council. So we're campaigning for funding for parks, which has a lot of programs and community centers that families rely on, including preschool and after school programs. We were able to take $2 million from the police and move it to parks this past budget cycle, which is like the hardest the police have ever had to fight for funding in Portland. We're advocating for safe streets and free transit and fully funded K-12 schools, which are always facing a budget crisis in our state. And we are defending our universal preschool program because it's under attack right now from our Democratic governor, whose rich friends are mad at her because they have to pay the preschool tax. So it's become this whole war with the Democrats in our state. And we're also, of course, thinking about things like renters' rights and social housing. We passed a social housing measure through City Council a few months ago. We're thinking bigger picture too, like how to tie this into our messaging around Gaza. And, supporting families means stopping our complicity in the genocide and, the slaughter of babies in Gaza. Like I mentioned, I'm a new mom. My daughter is 16 months old. And I think a lot of us who joined DSA around 2016, 2017, when like thousands of young people joined, we're now sort of like aging into this demographic where people typically have children if they want them. And the problem is a lot of people my age who want children, or they maybe have a child and one another, they're putting it off because they don't see a way to afford it. It's just the childcare costs are insane. Housing is insane. There's a crisis of affordability in this country. And so trying to combat that and using like pro-family messaging while we do it is really what we're trying to do in Portland.
I think the right could really be complacent on this in a way that could be fatal, because when I went home and talked with a bunch of my cousins who are all, like you said, at that age, they're interested in Miss Rachel, and they're not interested in replacing PBS with PragerU.
Yeah.
And also just schools, the importance of schools. I mean, that is first of all, it's an issue that the Democratic Party establishment has abandoned in favor of like playing footsie with charter schools for so long. But that is so vital. So I think it was a real shame to see a lot of people. This is what the New York Post is going to do, I guess. They're haters because they're at the the table of success or something like that. It's I think it's a really important initiative. David, is there anything else you wanted to ask?
No. I mean, I think it's really important, and I just wanted to tell people to go check out our conversation we had with Megan Day a couple weeks back on this. We went really into depth about like how to frame this on the left, because it's about taking care of people. It's about freedom, and the fact of the matter is that the right is the anti-freedom party when it comes to this. When it comes to the right to to have an abortion, or even the right to have a child, because they're the ones, and along with the capitalist class and the ruling class in this country, who are making it so difficult for people to have kids. And I think that the work that y'all are doing in Portland and everything, Olivia, is great, because I think reclaiming this, and it's an easy win for us because like our position is so much stronger that it's always inspiring to see people, take that and knock that out of the park.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that the bottom line is we keep saying we want to create a politics of collective care. So directing public resources towards people who perform paid and unpaid care work for others, whether or not they're related. So that's what we're trying to do.
Exactly. And maybe by the time ChatGPT 6 comes out, the New York Post can figure out how to make proper citations. Olivia Katbi, where should people follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter, Olivia Katbi, and Instagram, Olivia M. Cat.
Well, Thank you so much for joining us. It's great meeting you.
I'll say, we owe the Portland folks a lot more coverage. We're hoping to do more in the near future. So thank you so much for joining us and chatting with us. It means a lot.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, that was really great. Speaking with Olivia, let me get in shot here. It was really nice. And I'll just say again, so nice to meet all these people who you've been kind of reading or seeing their tweets and things like that for years in person. And they are doing a lot of really great stuff in Portland. And I think we've been talking to a lot of the folks in that organization to cover it a little bit more on this program, which I'm looking forward to. As I had that experience across the board with so many people all across the country. We're going to have conversations with good folks from Atlanta DSA in the near future. We're going to be covering a lot of the stuff that I was talking to with people in Texas, as well as folks all across the country. It's just really nice to have the opportunity to come together.
We met so many people. It was an absolute whirlwind. Yeah, and that's very good. I wish I had my little koozie. I saw some DSA folks talking about doing like conventions where it's more social than business, which not that we did a whole lot of business. We were just kind of socializing as media members, but was a great way to enjoy the conference.
Yeah, 100%.
Or the convention, sorry.
Well, we still got a fatty of a show. I mean, we're going to be going to our conversation with Seth Harp in just a little bit. If you want the whole show, ad-free, and get the postgame immediately after, you got to sign up at patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access to that, plus our weekly bonus episodes. But yeah, we got a lot more going. Should we get over to our conversation with Neal Meyer?
Yeah, you've heard Neal on this program. It was great to meet him also in person. And here, this is kind of a little wrap up, not quite all the way through the convention, but a good little chat he and David had here.
All
right, friends, as y'all know, we've been covering a lot of the DSA convention. It's been a lot of fun, and we were able to bump into a frequent guest on Left Reckoning, a good friend, Neal Meyer, and I couldn't think of a better person to kind of chat about what this convention's been like.
Yeah, thanks, David, for having me. And yeah, it's been a good convention, I think, so far. It's we've got about 1,600 people here.
Tremendous.
In Chicago. So feeling really good vibes and good politics.
Well, I'll tell you, I was at the Rashida speech, the opening speech yesterday, and it was just electric. I mean, it really, like, it's really important to, like, have these kind of meetings. Just, like, obviously there's a lot of logistical and political things that need to be figured, but, like, there is something about, like, being in the same room as all these people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And she's become, I think, the figurehead for DSA in many ways. I mean, she's really the moral center of our group.
And I know we have other things to talk about, but I would just say, like, she really, in my opinion, I'm curious here, is like, she really is kind of one of the more model, like, political members.
I think so. Yeah. I think she's a real tribune for our politics. I mean, she's so principled. She's so consistent. She's really got a strong relationship with DSA in Detroit. She comes out of a movement background and a political background. She talked a lot in her speech about her UAW parents, and so she's an amazing figure, I think. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you, just kind of, I know there's a lot of stuff in the weeds and we don't need to get into it, but, for people who aren't at the convention, who might be members or might be interested in DSA, I mean, what are your kind of thoughts about how things have been going so far?
I think it's been going well. I think we got off to a bit of a rocky start with some technical difficulties, and we debated a lot of organizational questions, but the organization has really grown. I've been to every single DSA convention since 2013, so this is my 7th one, and the first 2 conventions I went to were tiny little affairs where you'd get 100 people in a room and there would be no competitive elections for anything, and you'd be lucky if you had a serious debate on a single question. And then I was at the 2017 convention, which was sort of the rebirth of DSA, where we did have a large, crowd, and there was this sense that there was a new socialist organization in the country. And since then we've been, having these every 2 years, and every 2 years we grow, and our strategy becomes more clear, I think, and delegates become more sophisticated. People have a better sense of how to interact in a convention, how to deliberate together. So it's amazing to see.
Yeah. Well, in the last couple of minutes, I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about, I don't know, maturity sounds condescending, but this is a moment where, the questions, the political moment is like very stark. It's a very difficult moment. We obviously had this huge victory in New York. How do you feel about like DSA's capacity to sort of meet this moment and continue to grow, not just to like maintain itself, but continue to grow?
Yeah, it's going to be hard. I mean, I think that you're right that the moment we're living in is sort of it's obviously very difficult. It's a difficult one, especially for an organization like DSA that's still in its, I think maturity is actually a good word. I think it's in its early years, right? So we're not really a national force yet, but obviously we're getting more attention because of things like Zoran's victory. So we're not able to shape the national terrain totally, and yet we're starting to have a responsibility for taking positions on national questions that we didn't have in the past. And so that's kind of the transition moment we're in as a group. And I think you see that at this convention, that there's a mix of like the old debates we've had for years about how to build an organization, what kind of democratic structures do we need, and also some new questions about like what is our foreign policy perspective, how do we think about recruiting candidates in the future, what kind of organizations do we want to be allied with?
Yeah, I mean, I've been, from what I've gathered and what I've seen, I think that's very true. And I wanted to just sort of ask you to make a little bit of a pitch and a plug here. I mean, you're somebody who is, ardent supporter of the DSA and been a member for a very long time, but you're somebody who's involved in left-wing socialist politics. And, for folks who may have thought about maybe joining into DSA or consider themselves socialists but aren't already organized, I mean, could you talk about why it's important and maybe to kind of set you up a little bit? One thing that I always say to folks is people who consume a lot of left-wing media, they have a lot of opinions on things, and rightfully so. There's a lot of big questions. I think people get really frustrated when they feel like they don't have the ability to kind of like act on those feelings and frustration that they have. And could you talk a little bit about how DSA sometimes it can be a little ugly and difficult and hard, but it's actually a venue where like your political opinions matter, your convictions matter.
Absolutely. And your opinions are shaped in a real way. Like you can have a lot of opinions digesting left-wing media and what's going on in this world, but like until you actually get in a room and you argue and debate with your comrades and you try to deliberate over what the future of an organization is going to be, where there's real stakes, and you have to make compromises and you have to figure out like, okay, I really believe in this, but the majority is against me. What does that mean about what I think?
Yeah.
You know, like these are the things that really test you. And, you know, I think the role of a socialist ultimately is to be a persuader. You know, we're trying to persuade millions of people about our kind of politics and about the change we want to see in this world. And you really can't be an effective persuader if you can't, to begin with, convince your comrades in a room of 1,000 people to move with you in the direction you want to go. So it's a training ground, really, as a first step.
Well, Neal, I know you have a lot of responsibilities at this convention, so I won't keep you much longer. But thank you so much
David.
for coming on.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great talking to Neal there, David. Good job also on that one.
Yeah, thank you. No, it was fun. Neal is Neal's a real stand-up guy, and it was great being able to chat with him in person after having so many conversations with him on this program, and we'll certainly be doing more in the future. So also, man, it was fun doing these in-person interviews too. You know, for years it's been, you know, we obviously back in the day with TMBS we had the studio, but for years now, it's been kind of, you know, behind the computer screen, and that's nice because we get to reach so many people. But it's really something else to be able to hang around folks. So I have to work on not bouncing around too much while I'm interviewing people, but that comes with practice.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, but yeah. And also we want to do more of this in the future.
Yes,
I think,
yes.
you know, somebody made a very strong pitch for labor notes. I can't remember between which beer that was. It's who made that suggestion, but it has stuck with me. And there's a few other things that would be nice to go to as well, just to like actually have these in-person it was funny. I saw some DSA people talk about how much better it is now that, and that we're wearing people wearing masks, and I think it's good to wear masks because I have a cold right now, not COVID. I tested, but the convention where you couldn't even see people's faces and had to stay masked the entire time. You know, there's something about being in person and talking to people, even like this. Like you see our faces, but it's a different. You could read people a little bit differently when you're actually in person. But.
Oh, 100%. And, you know, it's also just good to have connections with folks. I mean, socialism is social, like at its fundamental nature.
Right.
And, you know, it's really nice to be able to do that. And I think what we're getting at, humbly, is that we really want to do more of that. And supporting this program does help us do that. I won't do the whole pitch here, but really, we do want to be able to hit the road. It is kind of costly. We're not sponsored to do this or anything like that. Matt and I are paying out of pocket to go out there, get all the equipment that we need to do these interviews, which was fun to learn how to do, and we'll get better with over time. But if you do like this and you want to see more, do please consider supporting us.
Also, yeah, we didn't even talk about some. I see some people saw us do Chicago Handshake on Hassan's Twitch
true.
stream. I will say we'll talk about more in the post game, but very surreal experience to open up a chat where 20,000 people on Twitch are commenting on
Who
your
are these guys? Who are these
conversation.
Yeah, no, it was really fun meeting Hassan as well, and obviously spending time with you and Emma. You know, really was a wonderful weekend. And yeah, we have a lot of reflections that we're going to share on the post games. You get access to that by signing up and becoming a patron. But before we do that, this conversation with Seth, I think, is one of the ones that I've been most excited about for a very long time. I've been working through and reading Seth's book a couple times over the past few months after they sent us one of the early copies of it. And I was just kind of shook with how in-depth the reporting was, and also shocked at just how deep you know, the kind of corruption and malice goes. You know, we have a kind of politics on this program that, you know, we shouldn't be surprised that maybe there's some unsavory things happening in the U.S. military and our government. But I don't know, seeing the impunity, frankly, with the way that some of these forces and the special forces are acting was legitimately shocking to me. And Seth is a real deal journalist. You know, he's doing the thing, going to talk to the people. I mean, hell, this is somebody who's, you know, covered war zones before. So having him on the program was really special. And I can't suggest this book enough. I know we're about to talk about it at length, but really go and pick this book up right now, because I actually have a feeling, and I've been heard, that it might sell out pretty quickly. So if you want to get your hands on a copy right away, you're probably going to need to do that as soon as possible.
Yeah, if you read any books on the U.S. military and the condition of it, this is one you're going to want to pick this one up. This is absolutely essential.
Yeah. Well, let's get this conversation with Seth, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll be right back after that for the post game. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here, and really excited to be joined by Seth Harp, who is a journalist and a contributing editor at Rolling Stone and the author of this excellent new book, The Fort Bragg Cartel, which I really enjoyed. Seth, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Man, I'll tell people this at the beginning and at the end. Y'all need to pick up this book. I'm serious. I really enjoyed it. I was, I was shocked throughout it. Like the kind of impunity that a lot of the figures in the military have, and the figures and the subjects of your book is quite shocking. And I really want to get into that and talk about that. But before we do, I sort of want to set the stage a little bit, because a lot of your reporting outside of this and in this book is kind of connecting the global drug trade to the global war on terror. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that connection. They might have the association with Afghanistan as a country that, produces opium. But how did the global war on terror really kind of accelerate, opium production?
That's a great question. And you can actually take it, a step back further, talk about the global war on drugs as a sort of prototype or prelude to the global war on terrorism, because for the U.S. national security state to function, it needs a permanent enemy. There needs to be permanent wars. There needs to be some kind of paradigm that's constantly justifying new military interventions in order to boost the profits of the defense sector and, enforce political rigor at home. So in the 1980s, and 90s, as the Soviet Union is collapsing or has collapsed, the sort of abortive paradigm, although it was never really abandoned, was the global war on drugs. It was sort of a brainchild of George H.W. Bush and Reagan, other Reagan figures as well. And that was supposed to be, like the paradigm that all interventions around the world were justified. And there were a few, there was Panama, there were others, there was a lot of stuff going on in Colombia, Central America, et cetera. But, it really never had the juice of this so-called global war on terrorism. Drug traffickers are not this sort of enemy that you can hold up to, like Osama bin Laden or what have you, or Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi, these who actually lead countries that can be invaded and overthrown. So the sort of global war on terror, drugs as a military paradigm kind of faded into the background, but was never really truly abandoned. And in fact, there's a special forces group, 7th Group, that's based down in Florida that's primarily focused on Latin America and the drug war. A lot of the cases of drug, or several of the drug trafficking cases that I document in my book, deal with soldiers who are stationed in that unit. So it's kind of like this program that's running in the background of the global war on terrorism, where there are military interventions. Actually, not many people know this, but Colombia in the early 2000s was the site of a lot of sort of proxy war between the U.S. and the FARC. A lot of that was going on sort of very low key during the second Bush administration, or the administration of George H.W. Bush, the younger, the son. And because of all the things that were going on in Iraq and elsewhere, it was barely reported on at all, but there was really fierce fighting. There were special forces, presumably intelligence officers and agents as well, that were down there. They were helping the Colombians fight the FARC in the jungles of Colombia. So that's all, like I said, going on in the background. But to answer your question about Afghanistan, I mean, that's a subject that we can really go off on the deep end. So I'll try to keep it limited. But, I guess the most important thing to understand about drugs in Afghanistan is that Afghanistan as a narco state is fully explicable by its history of U.S. intervention. And American foreign policy elites' complicity in the global drug trade was never so sustained, substantial, witting as it was in Afghanistan. And the consequences of that were felt all over the world.
You have a quote in here that I was going to read that speaks to this, but here's your quote. Ever since World War II, illegal drugs have served as a common coin for the purposes of espionage, paramilitary operations, covert actions, and the foreign entities that choose to work for the U.S. military and the CIA often profit from this most capitalistic enterprise. Throughout its history, the CIA has worked to achieve American national security objectives in partnership with known drug traffickers, including the anti-communist Kuomintang, the founders of modern-day Taiwan, France's Corsican mafia syndicates, Cuban exiles opposed to Castro, Hmong irregulars in Laos, as well as the Royal Lao Army and Contra rebels in Nicaragua. But, as you said earlier, American foreign policy elites' complicity in the international drug trade was never so substantial, sustained, witty, and consequential as in Afghanistan. I thought that was pretty amazing because this is a long history that's kind of familiar, right? Like whether it's post-Vietnam, the rise of drug use, Gary Webb's Dark Alliance discussion. And on that note, maybe we can like just tell people who is JSOC and who is Delta Force.
JSOC is the Joint Special Operations Command, and Delta Force is the Army component of JSOC. The Joint Special Operations Command was created in the early 1980s, right around 1980. And I talk about in my book how the timing of the creation, and Delta Force was created a little bit before that, I think 78. And I talk about in the book the interesting timing about how these military commands, which are devoted to covert operations, black operations, including espionage, as well as assassinations, abductions, and other type of things, bugging missions, that sort of thing, how it emerged right after the Church Committee and really when the CIA's wings were clipped after Vietnam and all the atrocities that were revealed, spying on anti-war dissidents, all the MK Ultra stuff. After all that stuff came out and the CIA was mandated to report its covert operations to Congress, which hadn't been the case before, that's right when you saw the military create, it's not exactly the same thing as the CIA, but has many overlapping capabilities. And JSOC, unlike the CIA, really doesn't have to. There is complex regulations that provide a measure of congressional oversight. But across the board, as a general matter, it's not subject to the same kind of regulation and oversight as the CIA. And a theme of my book is how JSOC and Delta Force have been used over the years to accomplish covert missions really completely out of sight of our own government and as well as the citizenry.
And just before we bring it up to modern times, this Iran-Contra this helps explain part of Iran-Contra.
It's all kind of wrapped up. I'm not sure I fully understand all of the depth and complexities of Iran-Contra. I mean, I understand the superficial aspects of it that came out. My sense is that it was a lot deeper than that. But yeah, you're correct that the essence of it was kind of using military. It was mostly military figures implicated in Iran-Contra who were doing secret operations, who were answering only to the vice president. There's a lot of sort of sale of arms and other untraceable commodities to fund covert operations. So you definitely can trace that through line to Iran-Contra.
Yeah, I mean, so to start to get into the Fort Bragg Cartel, as you're calling it in your book, I wanted to just help people understand who don't, the relationship between like JSOC and Delta Force and the presidency, right? Because I think that one of the big themes of your book is, one, how the terror abroad has sort of, come home. But two, how this dangerous culture, this violent culture also has a sense of impunity because it's very connected to extremely powerful people. So, I mean, could you just talk about how close these organizations are to the president and what other institutions have the ability to kind of check or be watchdogs over them?
So Delta Force is the core of the Joint Special Operations Command. But JSOC also includes elements from every other service branch. So a lot of people have heard of SEAL Team 6. That's the naval part of JSOC. There's other ones. There's one from the Air Force. There's not one from the Marine Corps, to my knowledge. But it is a full spectrum. They say counterterrorism strike force is kind of the way it would be described internally, and it has one of the shortest chains of command in the military. The commander of JSOC answers directly to the Secretary of Defense, and who, of course, answers directly to the president. So you're talking about just 3 links before you get to, let's say, the commander of Delta Force, then 5 links to a shooter on the ground. That's the most abbreviated chain of command you'll see anywhere in the military. And you often have guys who are sitting at some fire base somewhere in Somalia or Ethiopia or wherever on the border of Yemen, who are sitting there waiting for, a phone call from the White House, to JSOC, to Fort Bragg, telling them, okay, you guys are good to go in and kill these people, or to capture this person, or to install these bugging devices at this location. So it is very much, you can think of it, not to be too sort of hyperbolic, but I have sometimes described it as like the Praetorian Guard of the imperial presidency.
No, I mean, like, this is, there's so, again, like, people really need to pick up this book, because you're really getting into a lot of things about, like, one, this horrific story in the U.S., but two, the kind of shocking way that our military and our government operate abroad, right? And, when we're getting into this book, I think that, like, one of the things that you do so well is pulling us, both to, like, the global war on terror and all these things are happening abroad and how they're affecting folks at home. And maybe to set this up a little bit, because we can keep talking about America's imperial activities till the cows come home. The book centers around these series of murders, and maybe, instead of going through each one like individually, sort of take us through your experience as a journalist and an author. What was it about some of these murders that sort of like rang alarm bells for you, that you thought, okay, there's something that needs to be uncovered here?
It's the double homicide at the center of the book. It took place in December 2020, right as sort of the tail end of COVID. I just read an article in the New York Times that said that these two soldiers have been found murdered on Fort Bragg, and that the officials suspected it was a drug deal gone wrong. What really clued me into the idea that there must be a deep story here is the fact that one of those soldiers belonged to Delta Force. And in all the years that the New York Times story didn't say that, but Jack Murphy on his blog, he's a special ops blogger, he was the one who reported that. So I read the New York Times article, and I read that Jack Murphy had disclosed that this guy was Delta Force. And in all the time that I had worked as a war reporter, and before that I actually served in the military myself, I had never heard of Delta Force having its name in the news for any reason. When I fact checked that, I found that actually in 2004 they were talked about because they were part of the Abu Ghraib prisoner abuse scandal. Other than that blip, there has never been a mention of Delta Force in any sort of derogatory concept, in any sort of derogatory light, for 20 years. And so the fact that one of their guys had been murdered on Fort Bragg, and that it was some kind of drug deal, I realized there must be a story here. And that's how I came to write the first Rolling Stone article that led to additional Rolling Stone articles that led to the book.
What is Fort Bragg? Is that primarily these special operations Delta Force guys, or is Delta Force just a small part of what makes up Fort Bragg?
Fort Bragg is primarily special ops. It's the Army's largest base, and they have the most elite troops there in the whole military. So Delta Force is kind of the pinnacle of it. It's not very big. I mean, you're talking about maybe a few hundred operators, 2,000 people altogether in the unit. Then below that, you have the Green Berets are based at Fort Bragg. It's the headquarters of Army Special Forces, and there's Third Group, which is a major Special Forces group there. And then the largest component of Fort Bragg, it's not Special Forces, but it's the 82nd Airborne Division, which is an airborne infantry division that is kind of the farm team for the Special Forces in a lot of ways, and also sort of the main fighting force of the Army. So anytime something goes down, the 82nd will be the first to deploy. The 82nd and also the 101st Airborne at Fort Campbell are the two main ones. So in Afghanistan, when they evacuated the airport, in Ukraine, when they recently sent troops when Russia invaded, it's 82nd every time. So, and then of course the Special Forces guys are continuously deployed all over the world. So it is this, I describe it as the beating heart of the U.S. Special Operations Complex.
So, I mean, let's get into it a little bit. I mean, one of the things that was kind of shocking to me, just, I mean, there's a lot in the book that's very shocking to me, but the very visceral part of the book is you talking about people returning back from deployments and having, thousands of dollars taped to their bodies, right? Returning and having their wives, kind of like unload all of this cash. So, give for people who don't know, like, let's get a sense of this kind of like underbelly of Fort Bragg here. Obviously there's the drugs, there's the murder, but there's people who are in doing very, very highly classified work for the U.S. government. It seems like don't have a lot of oversight over them, who are kind of making up the rules as they go, and had for a long time felt that they had no real need to worry about what was looking over their shoulder. So give us a kind of a sense of what Fort Bragg is like and what really was coming back home to the U.S. From our misadventures abroad.
Yeah, a lot of stolen cash. I don't really.
Could you tell the number? The numbers are crazy, just for people who don't.
It's hard to know how much money exactly was stolen, but in talking to a lot of sources, apparently, the book is mainly about drug trafficking, but apparently the most common form of criminality in the special forces is just straight up stealing money, because these guys are given large amounts of cash to work with, either to buy equipment in the field or to pay informants. And there's very little accountability for that. There's very little oversight. One of the main guys who I profile in the book, Timothy Dumas, the other soldier who was found murdered on Fort Bragg in 2020 that I mentioned, his job was actually to oversee the distribution of that cash, as well as a lot of other gear. And I have reason to believe that was how he first was corrupted. Now, in terms of the overall amount of money, I talk about those cases in my book where interviewing Army wives who he said personally like untaped thousands of dollars from her husband's body when he was bringing it home. There's no record of that because he was not arrested for that and he wasn't prosecuted. But just looking at the cases where there were arrests and prosecutions, I believe the figure is $52 million in documented cases of theft. But there's reason to believe that it's much more widespread than that. I talk about how the largest transfer of cash in the history of the Federal Reserve, I'm not even sure if there's a dollar figure on it, but it was definitely in the billions. It was like several hundred pounds of currency, of $100 bills that they offloaded, if not tons, I can't remember exactly. Mm-hmm. But it was a huge amount of cash that they shipped to Iraq just for the use of soldiers in the field. And basically all of it just disappeared over a few years, and there was really never any accountability. And nowadays, considering, SIGAR, that the agency that did so much retrospective investigation on what went wrong in Afghanistan, a lot of the information that I relied upon came from SIGAR. Nowadays, like around the war in Ukraine, they're out in front of that. So there's like legislation that's specifically been written to make sure that there can't ever be any accountability around like weapons transfers and cash transfers to Ukraine. This is one of the craziest things about the Ukraine war, just a blip that you see in various news articles about it. But yeah, that's like written into the law now that there can never be an accounting, of some of this stuff. But theft of cash, it's definitely a thing in the special forces. If I could say one final thing about that, the case of Logan Melgar, who was murdered, a Green Beret who was murdered in Mali, he was killed in Mali by two SEAL Team 6 operators, JSOC guys. Apparently, the source of their disagreement with Melgar was that he had either reported or threatened to report their theft of money from what's called the OP fund. It really is pretty widespread from what I can see.
I mean, let's talk a little bit, more specifically about the drugs. I want to talk about the distribution in a second, but just up front, I mean, you document this pretty well in the book. I mean, just how awash with drugs are these members of the service?
Yeah, it's really crazy. It wasn't necessarily something I was tracking before I looked into Fort Bragg, and I also don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. I'm not sure I can say that the U.S. military as a whole has a drug problem. Officials, when they respond to the stuff that I've written, will often point to sort of aggregate levels of drug overdoses in the military that shows that it's significantly below the national average. Well, that's true, but it's not true at Fort Bragg. at Fort Bragg, service members are more likely to die of a drug overdose than the average American. So this is something that really is confined to the Army Special Operations community. And there it's quite pervasive, especially in the Special Forces. It's sort of a, I don't know, a part of the stereotype of a Green Beret that lags public perceptions. Like people in Fayetteville completely associate Special Forces guys with, just doing loads of blow when they go out and drink. I don't think most Americans are aware of that. I certainly was before I started. I certainly was not before I started researching this book.
So, let's talk about alleged Mexican white, because this is an interesting part of the book, just, talking about, maybe some of the, I don't know, knowledge that some government agencies had, or, lack of interest in maybe investigating these things. So what was this alleged Mexican white, and, where was it probably more likely to be coming from than Mexico?
Yeah. I'm trying to make a joke about the stuff we were talking about earlier, Mexico City and the gringos down there.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's a very strange kind of like made up term that I surfaced in trying to reconcile two facts that were very stark and seemed to be in opposition with one another. One of them was the sheer amount of heroin that was produced in Afghanistan under U.S. occupation. We're talking about 9 times as much heroin as the rest of the world combined. So they're producing more than 90% of the world's heroin in this one country. Compare like 1,000 metric tons of heroin coming out of Afghanistan versus second place is Mexico with 50 metric tons, to show the scale of how much more Afghanistan dominated that. Keep in mind that this is during the 2000s and 2010s, when there were heroin crises not only in the United States but all over the world, ones that we know less about in places like Australia had a terrible heroin crisis in those years. Mm-hmm. Russia, Iran, I think and Pakistan, those two countries had terrible drug problems because they're right next to Afghanistan. I mean, drugs from Afghanistan flooded the whole world. However, the DEA says that only 1% of the heroin consumed in the United States during this time came from Afghanistan. And looking at that, I was thinking, well, how can that be? Just knowing how the global drug market works is a fungible commodity. It's trafficked all over the world. How is it possible that they're just somehow excluding all of the hair? It's like saying that no oil from Saudi Arabia is ever burned in the United States. How can that be? How can you make that claim? And so I really dug deep in the weeds on the DEA's basis of that claim. They never responded to any of the many written inquiries that I sent them, but they had a lot of publications put out over the years, the National Drug Threat Assessment. And then I was able to find that the source of the claim was to 2 heroin monitoring programs that the DEA runs, where they either, in one of them, they buy undercover officers, go out in the United States for research purposes, buy small amounts of heroin in select cities and test it for its geographic origin. And then they also report seizures to another monitoring program where they send them samples from seizures, and then those are tested as well for their geographic origin. However, when I looked at those programs and how they actually operate, I realized that they were just riddled with untenable assumptions and selection biases, and were basically completely meaningless. And this is all to get to the alleged Mexican white thing. I'm coming to that. But first of all, they don't include any busts over $200, which I can't understand why.
Incredible.
They don't include any busts at airports, and 100%, essentially 100% of Afghan heroin is trafficked through airports. So that selection bias alone could almost exclude all of the Afghan heroin, because all the Mexican heroin is trafficked overland. And then there's also a geographic bias towards the Southwest and the South, when most Afghan heroin goes to the Northeast, which incidentally was where the heroin crisis was the most severe. Now, most glaringly, the DEA found that fully 60% of the heroin that they analyzed was from, they don't know where. They say they don't know where it was from. It was a white type of heroin, China white, they call it. And they just assumed, they just wrote into their calculations, well, we're just going to assume this is coming from Mexico. And they never explained what the basis of that reasoning was, because Mexican heroin is famously black in color. They call it black tar heroin. Then they just slapped this made up nomenclature on it, alleged Mexican white. and never really bothered to explain themselves. So when DEA spokesmen would get on the phone and tell, I don't know, reporters for, I think I read BBC, I think I read The Guardian, quoting this figure of 1%, they're not bothering to explain to them, well, they say we're sure that only 1% comes from Afghanistan, not disclosing that we actually don't know where 60% of the heroin in the US actually comes from. We're just assuming that it comes from Mexico. So yeah, I found that to be pretty dishonest.
It's just like, just to make this really abundantly clear for people, we're seeing massive amounts of production in Afghanistan, and somehow we're supposed to believe that in the largest drug market in the world, the United States, we're not being inundated with stuff that is being produced coming in from Afghanistan. I mean, it's completely ludicrous, to be completely honest.
Yeah, but you know what? We laugh at them, but it totally worked. Because for 20 years, you had people falling out from heroin. 15 years, let's say, before it was supplanted by fentanyl. You had heroin recognized as a massive problem in the United States, and literally no linkage between that and the war in Afghanistan. Nothing. I mean, that amount of that sort of blanket whiteout is just a marvel to behold. I mean, you almost can't believe that they got away with it.
Because you can't really understand the Afghanistan war, particularly the impact it has on at home, without that part of the story. It'd be like talking about Vietnam without, the subsequent addiction problems and other stuff.
Truly. And I feel like, I was working as a journalist during the latter part of the war in Afghanistan. I feel like we all dropped the ball and not putting that together, because when I started to investigate it, I've worked in Iraq, I've worked in Syria, Ukraine, other countries. I've never actually worked in Afghanistan, never been to Afghanistan. So I knew less about the war. And as I was educating myself on the war, because I needed to, because my main characters did many deployments there, it was just so eye-opening to see how much evidence there was that the U.S. client state was behind all of the drug production. And you're talking about the biggest, and to the extent we ever heard about this during the war in Afghanistan, it was always blamed on the Taliban. And here's the flip side of all of this. It's like, even now, if you Google a Taliban, or if you look at any, sort of media, governmental source of information, it all says with the same confidence that they tell you that only 1% of heroin in America comes from Afghanistan, it tells you that the Taliban was responsible for producing all those drugs. And that's another claim that was just totally unsubstantiated in a way that I struggled to even wrap my head around. The truth is the opposite. And I guess it's an example of that sort of truism that, the big lies are the ones that are the easiest to get away with it. Something that's 180 degrees from the truth is the easiest one is paradoxically the easiest to pass off. Because the Taliban, not only is there no evidence that they were responsible for any of the production under U.S. occupation, as Saigar pointed out, they actually first emerged in the 1990s specifically to combat drug traffickers who had invaded Afghanistan and taken over Afghanistan after being armed and funded by the CIA in Operation Cyclone in the efforts to drive out the Russians from Afghanistan. So from the very beginning, the Taliban had in their ideological DNA an anti-drug agenda. We always talk about how they don't allow women to vote or whatever. They don't, you can't play music, these crazy things that the media fixates on. But they never talk about how the Taliban suppressed drug trafficking. As it turns out, so after Afghanistan got turned into a narco state in the 1990s, as I said, as a result of CIA intervention there, the Taliban emerged and wiped out all those guys and eliminated all of the heroin production that was taking place in Afghanistan. In fact, it's rather remarkable, the timing. The DEA sent people to Afghanistan. DEA has a complex relationship, by the way, with the CIA around issues like this, to say the least. But they sent people to Afghanistan in, I think, May or June of 2001 to verify reports that the Taliban had totally eliminated the world supply of heroin, in essence. And they certified it as true. And then, of course, 5 months later, 9/11 happens. The U.S. invades Afghanistan. And who does JSOC and the CIA team up with? Well, they team up with the exact same drug traffickers that the Taliban had driven into the north of the country. You look at the reporting around the so-called Northern Alliance in the early years of the war, And the message discipline of American reporters is truly marvelous to behold, because hardly any of them said anything about these people's history in the drug trade and how they were all known narco warlords. Those people get put back in power in Kabul. The Taliban is routed. Hamid Karzai, his brother Ahmed Wali Karzai was literally the biggest narco in Afghanistan. One of the government's first acts under U.S. occupation, the client government's, Hamid Karzai's government, was to legalize poppy cultivation. They just made it legal again. And I believe that within 2 years, they were back to pre-Taliban levels of drug production. And then you saw an increase of something like 7,000%. All of the regional figures that the U.S. backed in various capitals of Afghanistan, regional capitals of Afghanistan, it was an alliance of warlords. I end up just calling it a cartel in my book because I don't know what else you can call it. When the DEA draws their org charts of cartels in Mexico, they're not going off of any better information than what we have about these guys in Afghanistan. I mean, you could totally say, here's the boss, Hamid Karzai, world's biggest drug lord, and here's his top 5 lieutenants in Jalalabad and Kandahar and the Helmand and Marja and wherever else. I mean, that's what it was, just that overt. And you had all this footage of troops patrolling these poppy fields. And I could go on about this, but to cut to the chase, to come to the conclusion of it, when the Taliban finally retook Afghanistan after the U.S. withdrew in 2021, they did the exact same thing they had done in the late 90s and 2000s. They eliminated all of it from Afghanistan, all of it. And was there any corrective in the reporting that had been done previously to say that, the Taliban or the narco traffickers, the Taliban insurgency and the drug trade in Afghanistan are two sides of the same coins? Nothing. There was just a few reports, the Taliban got rid of drugs, and then the subject was dropped. And so the mendacity I see in the reporting is kind of a meta element of this. Like, I just can't believe I wanted to write the true account, but at the same time, I was just constantly like my jaw dropping, just imagining that all this time, no one has brought any of this to a sort of widespread public attention. It's really incredible.
I'll tell folks again, like, my jaw was on the floor, and I consider myself to be a fairly well-informed person, but the more that you uncover in this book, the more shocking that it gets, just how deep it goes. And I wanted to talk about a little bit of like the continuity here between Trump and Obama, Biden and Trump again. When it comes to this special relationship for these kind of clandestine military organizations, there is a kind of pop idea that communist Obama came in and kind of spit at the troops and was in front of them, but he was very, very beneficial to a lot of these organizations, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, you hear nothing but good things about Obama in the community. I mean, talk to guys who have served in Delta Force, and they have the highest, esteem for his presidency because he really put them at the forefront of everything. I talk about in the book about how, because Obama did criticize the Iraq War as a candidate, and then, in fairness to him, he's not a president that I admire, but in fairness to him, he did withdraw troops initially from Iraq. Mm-hmm. However, before that happened in 2007, there was what we call the surge. And the surge was really when JSOC became the JSOC that we have today. It was, on the surface, it was an increase in conventional troops who were deployed to places like Baghdad to sort of hold down the fort. But really behind the scenes, what happened around 2007 and 2008, for the folks who don't remember, who don't know, the Iraq War up until then had been going very, very badly. And that was why there was sort of this sort of reshuffling of personnel, new strategy. And the new strategy that was introduced was primarily an assassination program, something that we heard nothing about in the news at that time. But I reconstruct them in the book. And it was perceived as having been successful, and credit where it's due, it was successful temporarily because what they did is just went out and started assassinating basically anybody. Mm-hmm. They started going out at night, guys in plain clothes, and assassinating basically anybody who was in any way linked to someone who was suspected of being an insurgent, with zero accountability around the program and an incredibly aggressive, tempo of operations, talking about 12 night raids a day, something like that. And the result of that, and like I said, in credit where it's due within these limited constraints, violence against U.S. troops did drop precipitously in 2008. And so people in Washington, including Obama and his whole team, they saw the surge. Although they were critics of the Iraq War, they thought, well, this is the way to fight wars. Like, this actually worked, because it allowed things to calm down enough that they could withdraw troops. Mm-hmm. So what did Obama do in Afghanistan? At that time, the Afghanistan war was going very, very poorly, and they basically re-implemented the exact same strategy over there. And that was when you saw the sort of all covert global war on terrorism. That's when the media coverage of it really dropped, and you started to see, all of this, the entire warfighting effort being prosecuted by the Joint Special Operations Command and by units like Delta Force. And so a lot of this, people are familiar with Obama's drone wars, and that's a big component of it. Not to give it short shrift, but there has been short shrift given to the assassination program, which is often referred to by the euphemisms night raids. Go ahead.
No. I mean, I just wanted to get you to talk a little bit about, this, engagement doctrine that Obama and other presidents have now when it comes to the global war on terror. Like, why is there activity in Africa, right? Or like, why was there, there were troops in Syria? Like, the difference between what we are sort of told in the U.S. about like American military engagement activities globally is very different from what's actually happening on the ground. Because you talk about the way that the global war on terror is used with this assassination program to kind of justify pretty much anything that a president may want to do.
Yeah, I mean, the legal groundwork for it is highly attenuated, and intellectually dishonest. It started with Al Qaeda. They got a congressional resolution because there is a legal architecture around all of this. Mm-hmm. You can't just send out, and these people that are in these institutions, to them, they take it seriously. They're not entirely. It may seem like to us that they're acting in a completely lawless way, but they have a way that they justify internally where everything that they're doing is legal. And that starts with the authorization for the use of military force in 2001 that empowered the president to go after anyone who's working with Al Qaeda. And that's just expanded like concentric rings where they say, not only is it Al Qaeda, okay, now it's Al Qaeda and all of its affiliates. Now it's all their affiliates and all of their enablers or safe haven providers. Now it's anybody who poses a threat to Americans. I mean, they have successive secret orders from the president because all this stuff is secret. It's classified. And I believe that Trump issued tinkered with these regulations in a way that made it the most expansive ever during his first term. But it enables them to do what they call counterterrorism operations, which are primarily assassinations, sometimes abduction missions. Yeah, and Africa is a major theater, North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, large parts of Africa. Basically any part of Africa where Islam is widespread. There are what they call counterterrorism operations going on, including in Somalia. I mean, just this year, Trump, in a speech, didn't see this reported anywhere, but I read his transcript of his speech at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, where he was bragging about some of these kills. He was saying that I think that was in February, if I'm not mistaken, early in the year at any rate. And he said that since his inauguration, his words were, we have eliminated 68 terrorists in Syria, Iraq, and Somalia. And to me, I heard that as basically him boasting or admitting that the sort of units that I talk about in the book, like the Delta Force Expeditionary Targeting Force or JSOC forces in Africa, they've done 68 assassinations. And at that point, I guess it had been like 2 months. So they're killing scores of people a month in extrajudicial executions. Particularly in Syria, I think is where their operations are most intense. And a lot of that is in service, to Israel's objectives. A lot of that is for, the sort of shadow war that we have against Iran, which is really ironic considering the starting point, the point of departure was the 2001 authorization to go against Al Qaeda, because people who know the region are well aware that Iran is Shia and that the Al Qaeda and ISIS and other radical Islamic terrorist groups are Sunni, and that Iran is actually one of the major sort of enemies or persecutors of both Al Qaeda and ISIS. In fact, Iran did just as much, if not more, than the United States and its allies in Syria to destroy ISIS. So, yeah, does that answer the question?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I just want to follow up. You mentioned Israel, and one line of the book stuck out to me. William, during her first days on the job in 2010, Williams was informed that Israel was the only nation to which Delta Force would not do spying missions. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
It's astonishing the degree to which these people are cucked, for lack of a better word, by Israel. Like, it's just amazing that, when
they wear IDF uniforms sometimes when they're there, right?
In Israel, yeah. Sean Naylor reported that. I relied on Sean Naylor's reporting for that. But they wear whatever they want anytime. They wear whatever allows them to blend in. So it stands to reason that they do. But I did report firsthand from people in the unit that, that they weren't allowed to choose their own hotel rooms, that the IDF would just put them in places that were bugged. So they're, when operators go over to Israel, they're just staying in bugged hotel rooms and being spied on all the time. It's like how we allow Israel to spy in the United States. They're just given a pass. Like when they surrounded the White House with all those eavesdropping devices not too long ago. No one was arrested for that. Israel's allowed to spy on the United States. So I recently saw some of these operator podcasts. One of, I can't remember his name now, but he was talking about, he had some line where he was like, hey, he justifying some of these type of programs. He's saying, if you kill American citizens, then bearded men are going to hunt you down. And I was just thinking, yeah, unless you're Israel, right? Because Israel has killed, I don't know how many American citizens in the last 2 years. Maybe you guys know the figure, but I think it's in the realm of maybe 20 or so. Mm-hmm. And they haven't done shit about that, and they never will, because for some reason, they just allow this tiny narcissistic ethno-state that corrupts our politics, that pays off our politicians, that bribes people, that blackmails people. They just allow them to just do whatever they want. And so whenever you see some of these guys acting hard, I think you can remind them of how they bend over and take it from Israel, which is just fucking pathetic in my view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't and you talk about the degree to which a lot of these guys are damaged and paranoid about the sort of role that they're playing in the world, and it's probably psychically very challenging. And then to just accept something like that, like I can't imagine, your entire life you're trying to be this like elite fighter, and then told no, everyone but them. That's amazing to me. But go ahead, David.
I don't get it either. I think part of it has to do with the extent to which they rely on Israel for intelligence in the Middle East, because their Arabic capabilities, their language capabilities are very lacking in the CIA and in JSOC. And Israel, of course, has people that speak those languages, lots of them. So, but, that's another way in which Israel just controls them, because who knows what type of intel they're feeding them. There's no way for them to verify it. I mean, I would imagine that just on a nitty gritty level, that's a major way in which which Israel sort of influences U.S. military operations, is by feeding them select intelligence that they're not in a position to verify, and just allowing them to trust that it's true.
So Seth, a lot of people listening to this are going to pick up your book, which we'll have a link below for them to do so. I wanted to ask you, apart from, being shocked and, having their eyes open to a lot of the horrendous things the U.S. government has been involved in, what would you like, readers to really take from this book, or what kind of things should they be paying attention as they're going through this work?
I mean, that's a good question. Because to a large extent, while I was working on the book, I was just focused on like literally trying to solve a murder. That was what was motivating like all of this research, and was trying to figure out who killed Billy Levine and Timothy Dumas. And yeah, I have my own opinions of American foreign policy coming into it, but I wasn't really trying to go for any sort of prescriptive or normative angle. But I recently, Harper's Magazine sent me a report on Trump's military parade, which was mostly Fort Bragg troops in Washington. And the reporting that I'd done up until then, and then that really brought home, that really brought home the incredibly sad state of the U.S. military. Like, we're talking about it as if they're this incredibly menacing force. And they have been. I mean, they've killed millions of Muslims over the past 20 years, displaced tens of millions. and caused untold suffering and destroyed 5 different countries that we could list off. But people in the United States, I don't think, realize how hollowed out and debilitated and ridden with sort of criminality and corruption the military has become as a result of this, as a complex form of blowback of having particularly units or places like Fort Bragg, where they've been at the forefront of it, and they've been the ones who have actually been doing all these operations. People just don't realize how completely ate up because of the veil of secrecy that's around it. But a lot of these units are just, I think, just falling apart. And their culture is totally rotten. Their morale is in the tank. Recruiting is bad. And, the violence is catching up with them in a way. You see all this soldier on soldier murders, and it's impossible not to link it to what we have seen from the past, 25 years now of waging war without accountability all over the world. I feel like it's blowing back, and it's sort of just like dissolving it in this sort of acid bath. And, that's just something that people aren't really tracking. Is like, hey, our army is a fundamental institution of the United States that was actually created before the United States was even a country, is rotten to the core. And I'm not sure what we do about that or what to make of that, but just understanding it is the first step.
I'll just say, Dave and I have been hearing a lot about the Fort Bragg stuff because, like you said, like dozens of deaths, murders all over the place. And like, what's going on down there? And after reading your book, it's kind of a surprise that we would expect anything different. It makes a lot more sense that like this culture's been developing under the war on terror. So yeah, people need to check out the book.
Seth, thank you so much. We have the link below, the Fort Bragg Cartel. I'll also have a link for people to follow you. People should keep up with Seth on Twitter. Anything else, Seth?
No, thank you guys so much for having me. I mean, the only thing else I could add would be Free Palestine. Really appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, of course, brothers. Thank you.
I mean, awesome book, and awesome to be able to talk to him about that.
Yeah, I know, and I'm hoping that Seth's going to be able to take a little vacation or something. Hopefully we'll be able to have him on in a couple months again soon to talk about some other things. I just can't suggest the book enough. So there's a link in the show notes. It is called the Fort Bragg Cartel. You can find it, I'm sure, pretty much everywhere that is a reputable bookseller. Don't buy the weird AI-generated version of his book that's popped up.
Let me pull that up, actually. Yeah.
So this is, I think, going to become more and more of a problem in the near future as the AI stuff really takes off. My book, which we don't even have like a kind of final draft of yet, you can already buy fake AI versions of it. Right? And my book's nowhere near as big as Seth's. It is unbelievable. And it's wild that some of these companies and platforms aren't doing anything about this because, I mean, it is a huge scam and a scheme, and they certainly have the capabilities to pull these things down. But they're also so low quality. I don't want to make light of it, but they are so low quality that I have a feeling that most of the people who are pushing that kind of thing or are tricked by that kind of thing aren't really paying too much attention. But it's going to be a major problem, I think. I hope that we have this Seth thing.
Yeah, here it
is.
is.
So good.
This is the supposed biography of Seth Harp, written by Vibrant Publisher.
Beautiful, beautiful publishing house.
And that's available just above his, excuse me, above another one. Seth Harp, The Fort Bragg Cartel and the Shadows of War by someone named Tavian Locke. And again, why is this allowed?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's funny, like all this processing power isn't used by major companies to find scams. It's used to generate them based on very little effort. Just as, a book has been announced. ChatGPT or whatever the fuck. Keep me abreast of the books that are coming out soon. Okay, on all those books, create a fake one with a fake cover page or whatever. And put that online, and who gives a fuck if you only get 2 people to give you buy 2 copies of it. That's $12 for nothing, I guess, except for the AI subscription.
I mean, Matt, it's been bad enough. We've covered it a little bit on this program, the kind of like fake biographies of people. There was one a few years ago that people got very upset about when they found out that Matt was a multimillionaire. But what we were most upset about was that they said he was 5'4", which is
Yeah, that's
he's
libelous.
5'2". Yeah. No. I mean, it really is. It really is such a joke. Well, folks.
Sorry, just one final note
please,
on that
please,
before
please,
we go.
please.
Have you noticed like all these different like I'm seeing if I can find it on Instagram. I'll be like searching in a random part.
Matt, you got to get your goddamn computer fixed, boy. I apologize. This is a good time to pitch, though. Supporting the program at patreon.com/lovereckoning. So Matt can get himself a goddamn computer that works so that he
God
doesn't
damn it.
disappear all the time.
My
during the
6-year-old
program.
gaming PC is on its last legs. But this like if you go into messages, there's this AI studio thing, and it's like you can talk to different popular AIs.
Yeah, no, it's really evil. It is really evil.
And it's like there's a Donald Trump one, like the belly button queen, Mr. Workout, Star Wars guru, Granny Cougar.
Ooh. Can you send me that actually a little bit after?
Yeah, I'll give you. I'll DM it to you.
Well, folks, we're going to go over the post game in just a second, but I just want to make the quickest plug ever. We've been talking about it a lot. We're going to be covering it a lot over the next few weeks, which is why the DSA is such an important organization. We've been talking about the DSA. Matt and I are both members for years now, and we always tell folks, engaging with the news, engaging with politics is important, but what is most important is getting organized and taking action. And the DSA is the best shot for being able to do that. And we have seen just tremendous growth in this organization. It's an organization that has been punching above its weight for a very, very long time. And it's an organization that desperately needs to be able to include the masses of the American working class. And the way that you build that and build up the capacity to do this by joining. So we have the link for people to join. I'll post that in here so that you can become a member, get involved in these kind of things. We talked about it a little bit with Neal. But a lot of folks, myself included, right? We talk about politics a lot. We engage in debates. This is actually a place where those debates matter, right? Where you can actually engage and fight for change. And I've just, I was already convinced going into it, but I'm even more so now. I had a quick note I wanted to add on the DSA, unless you had something you want to add there.
No, by all means.
Just real quick, because there's a lot of nonsense, and I'm not going to go through all of it. But there's a lot of people out there who their only intention is to demoralize and demobilize the American left and the American working class. And there was a lot of bizarre lies about the DSA, saying that something like 40% of the people in DSA voted against "quote unquote" making it an anti-Zionist organization, right? That's just a bald-faced lie. It's one of those things where, like, you can maybe be confused about how these processes operate if you're not there, and they can be a little bit in the weeds. But the fact of the matter, that is not what that contingent was voting for. DSA is a firmly anti-Zionist organization, and I just wanted to say it because it really pisses me off so much. In fact, the guest that we had on the beginning of this program, Olivia, she was the author of a resolution that passed a unified democratic social strategy for Palestine solidarity that passed with overwhelming support. It's passed on consent effectively, which means that was one of those things that was everybody agreed with to such an extent that you almost don't even have to debate it because it would be a waste of time, right? That is the position of the DSA. The DSA has long been an anti-Zionist organization. In fact, it is probably one of the most effective anti-Zionist organizations in the United States of America. Right. And if you are confused about these things, maybe take some time to learn a little bit, to ask questions of folks. People in this organization are very happy to answer your questions and engage with you on these things. If you know better, you are a villain. Sorry, you are. You are somebody who aren't engaging in politics. You're engaging in slander and misinformation for what? For Twitter likes so that you can get engagement on fucking Elon Musk's platform. It really is despicable. And I really don't have much more patience for it. We won't spend too much more time getting into all of that because it is truly upsetting and kind of is a waste of our breath. But I wanted to just up that really quick because it does piss me off, especially when you are engaged, when you see people engaged in an organization like this who are fighting as hard as they are, to just be slandered by people who aren't frankly doing anything. In fact, they're harming and hurting the cause.
We got a message like that yesterday on MR, and I reacted in a similar way about the exact same sort of thing from people on the outside looking in. And I think the thing is like, one, if you want to be involved in these sorts of things, go be involved in it. This sort of like rubbernecking thing on social media is embarrassing. Because you know why? Because they're not doing shit.
It is.
Right, like go fine if you want to have an organization that would answer 99% or 100% on that issue, go organize it.
Yeah, totally, Matt. But also, like, hey, like, grow up.
Yeah.
And learn a little bit and have a fucking brain. If you saw a vote in Congress that was like the Jobs and Freedom Act that was pushed by the Republican Party,
Right.
and you saw Rashida Tlaib voting against it, right? And you're like, well, Rashida Tlaib is against jobs and freedom. I can't believe that. No, you would understand how stupid that is. The fact is that there are some people certainly who are confused. But there are a lot of people who know better and know that this is a good opportunity for them to settle scores with people that they don't like online. And I can't imagine anything more pathetic in the general context, but especially in this context of this life and death fight.
In the context of a genocide, it is crazy. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, folks. Well, we got plenty more to come. We're going to go over to the post game. You get access at patreon.com/leftreckoning. If you're already a patron, the link's up. You can watch the whole show, by the way, uninterrupted, ad-free over there. So jump over if you haven't already. Matt and I got a lot to get into. We're going to be taking your questions, as well as talking about some more reflections that we have from the convention, including some behind-the-scenes stuff. That was a lot of fun to get into. You're not going to want to miss it. So people who are on the free side, the lights are about to go out. But for our patrons, the lights are always on. You can get access at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Thank you to all of our guests. Thank you to Olivia. Thank you to Neal. And thank you to Seth for putting together this excellent book. People should follow all of them. Links below to keep up with everything. And yeah, come join us on the Patreon side.
Yep, and I'm going to try to restart my computer so I'm not dipping out like that. I'll see you guys in the
We'll
side.
play music for 1 minute. We'll be right back, friends.